Here we are for another part to the Platinum Games Marathon. Last time we covered a blood-hungry, violent, and mature Wii game called Mad World. This time we're looking at a sci-fi turn-based RPG called Infinite Space for the Nintendo DS. And I apologize if I sound a little off in this review. I'm still recovering from a cold, but I am feeling a little better now.
I don't think many people have actually heard about this game. In fact, I didn't even know that Platinum made this until doing research. Or maybe it was because they teamed up with a company called Nude Maker. Are these the same guys that made the Nude Raider patches for old school Tomb Raider games? And what are these guys doing nowadays? Absolutely nothing of interest. Anyway, let's first discuss the plot of Infinite Space, or rather just the premise. Yuri wishes to go out and see the stars and comes across this woman called Nia, who offers to help him get off his home planet and very kindly pawns his dead father's epitaph, without telling him, in order to buy a ship. She does this because early in the game Yuri's sister Kira gets captured by the ruler of their home planet, and he's rightfully quite pissed off at first that she did that. But then Nia makes it look like that Yuri's out of line for speaking to her like that, since he's supposed to be rescuing his sister who's still alive rather than holding on to an artifact that was passed on to him. I'm sorry, I don't care what bullshit excuse you come up with, you still don't do that without asking or at least talking about it first. But anyway, in typical RPG fashion, there are many adventures in the story, so going through every single little detail would take all day, but there's another reason I'm not doing a full plot synopsis for this review, and I'll explain in a moment. Battles at Infinite Space are relatively simple. Every command you make is done on the touchscreen, with the only purpose for the buttons being to skip through the text boxes during story segments. You have the option to choose between dodging, normal attacks, and barrages. On the left of the top screen is the battle gauge, which depending on the color will determine what command you can do. So if it's green, then you're able to dodge, if it's yellow, then you can do a normal attack, and if it's red, then you can fire multiple laser shots. But in order for your attacks to be super accurate, then you need to move your ship forward or backward and take a look at the radar at the top of the screen to see if your attack range meets the enemy vessel. For the longest time, I thought the little green bar had to match with the enemy ship to be accurate, but what you really need to pay attention to are the weapon icons above the ship's health meters. If they're red, then the weapons aren't in range, but if it's blue, then you may fire when ready. I just wish the attack animations didn't go on for so freaking long. It's cool the first time watching your crew set up an attack and see the enemies blow up, but most of the time I'm skipping through these animations. At the very least, you can pretend you're either Captain Kirk or Captain Picard from Star Trek controlling the USS Enterprise. In between the battles, you can visit different planets to either get more information in taverns and talk to your friends, or you can recruit more people to your crew and assign them personal duties, with each character having different stats and more suited to certain fields. In some planets, you can also buy ships that you unlock by obtaining blueprints throughout the story or by completing side quests, as well as putting together a number of modules in each of your ships to improve its performance, except the Daisy for some reason. And yes, I said ships plural, because you are eventually able to control up to 5 ships at a time to do some serious damage. The planets also act as pit stops to repair any broken ships and to also let your party rest to prevent fatigue. You see, as you travel to the different planets, your crew will become more and more tired and makes the battle gauge fill up more slowly the more exhausted they are. This can be somewhat prevented by, for example, assigning someone like Kira as head chef and provide food for the team, but you still gotta be sure to get the best results by traveling in short distances and not letting your crew work too hard, and this wouldn't be so much of a problem if they didn't get tired so damn quickly. Even if you're just traveling from one planet to another, the fatigue meter gets around halfway full. How lazy are these asses? And there's some weird ways to progress in the story. Sometimes you'll finish a conversation with one character and the game will boot you out of the tavern, but then it turns out you have to speak to that same character again for the plot to get moving. And other times you have to backtrack to planets you've already visited, only for them to give you a small bit of exposition before you need to head back to where you were. This doesn't sound bad considering how fast it is to travel, but you're constantly going back and forth throughout this universe that you never stay in one location for more than a few minutes. There are random encounters to break up the traveling and help level up your crew, but this gets monotonous very quickly. It's the same thing over and over again, and yeah, you do unlock more commands further into the story, like the melee command, which has a rock paper scissors mechanic that I swear to god the game never lets me win, but these space battles get so tiresome. Out of the 40-hour adventure, I've only managed to play up to 4.5 hours, not including the fair amount of times I got a game over, because Infinite Space also loves to throw steep difficulty spikes at you. And by the time I struggled my way to the 3rd chapter boss and he was continuously kicking my ass, I just couldn't take it anymore. Save as often as you can, you will need it. Graphically, it doesn't look too bad for the Nintendo DS, and the music's pretty catchy too, but what good is that when the gameplay is an absolute slog? Unappealing RPGs are one of the most difficult games to talk about, and while this is definitely not the worst game I've ever played, in my opinion there are far better RPGs you could be playing. I enjoy Final Fantasy because each character behaves and plays differently. I like the Xenoblade Chronicles games for having customizable move pools. I love Fire Emblem for giving each of the many fighters their own backstories and the incentive to keep your party alive. Infinite Space doesn't really do anything to convince me to keep going. It's fulfilling watching your massive barrages of attacks obliterate an opponent if done correctly, but in an RPG there has to be more than that. It's not about how lengthy you can make your RPG, but rather what you can do to make the journey more interesting. This is the first time in a long while I've given up on a game for a review, and I realize I'm probably going to annoy some of you, as this game does have a bit of a following, but for me, I just want to move on to the next Platinum game. It may not seem like it, but I really tried to enjoy Infinite Space. I watched the tutorials on Sega's YouTube channel, as well as the animated shorts, which are nice to look at, and even though I kept dying over and over again, I did my best to persevere, but in the end, it was all too much for me to handle.
Which leads us to our next video, covering Platinum's arguably most famous title in their library, the long-legged witchy witch herself, Bayonetta. Engage teleportation!